Hey everybody, Rev here. As part of our celebration of our 1-year anniversary, we're putting out the first episode of Investigate the History, hosted by Carolyn Conover, onto our normal RSS feed. So please enjoy the episode, and if deep dives into magic and lore and history and monsters is your thing, you can head on over to patreon.com/thecritshow and join our Patreon, where each month you'll get an episode of Investigate the History, hosted by Carolyn Conover. Have a great weekend, and enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of Investigate the History. This is a companion podcast to The Crit Show. I am joined here with one of my dearest and oldest friends.
Oldest?
Well, yeah, oldest in the sense of, I mean, okay, both. How old you are and the longest.
So true.
Yeah. We're like, 30 seconds apart in age? And she is, actually, why don't you introduce yourself instead of me trying to just list off your huge list of pedigree.
List all the things off first and say the name last, so it's really confusing.
Yes.
I'm Carolyn Conover. I am a professor of theater at Blackburn College, which is a little college in Illinois. And I also work as a dramaturg, which is essentially a research tool for a theater. I got my bachelor's in theater performance and a master's in English drama and a master of fine arts in theater. So I've been researching a lot of theater for a very long time. Theater history and literature are my two areas of focus, I guess, that I enjoy the most.
Yeah, and so Carolyn is a nerd, but
That's so true. I didn't say that, but it's true.
Yeah, but she's a different kind of nerd. She very much loves the history and the background of things. I mean, I think you would have to go into dramaturgy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely true. I don't play RPGs. I've played one ever in my whole life. It was kind of a disaster. I'm not good at improv, that kind of, narrative on the fly like you all do in the game. But I know you all, and I've known you all so long. It's been really nice to listen to.
And so when she was listening to the show, she would message me randomly with some questions like, oh, so what is the deal with the soul bat? Or, why is this kind of vampire act this way as opposed to this other way? And as we were kind of having these conversations back and forth, at one point, she's like, I think this would be a really interesting kind of companion to the show of like, oh, let's do a deep dive on the history and like talk about why you picked what you picked or where the myths or the creatures come from. And that's kind of right in Carolyn's wheelhouse. So what we're going to do here is once a month, we are going to get together and we're going to talk about one of the story arcs. She's going to ask me some questions. She's going to share with you some history. You'll kind of get the feel for it as you go. But this is, if you are someone who loves the background story, if you like to know where myths or curses or urban legends come from, you're going to have a good time with this. And it's going to be specifically centered around the Crit Show and each story arc. So this first episode, we're going to talk about an evening at the Halifax. So normally it might be Carolyn doing the introduction, but I figured that since there was a huge, long rigmarole of what this was and how it came to be, that I would take that bullet and explain that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So should I just dive in?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I guess before we talk about specifically about the Halifax, you were giving me a little tutorial on how RPGs work and how Monster of the Week specifically is different than what's traditional. I guess the traditional kind of gold standard is D&D, I'm assuming. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So for somebody like me who's never played one, what's the uniqueness of Monster of the Week? Yeah,
so D&D is a lot of really dense rules. There is a rule for everything. D&D and Pathfinder are kind of the standard for RPG when it comes to a D20 system. And a D20 system means that you roll a 20-sided die, and then if you have a skill or a bonus, something, say that you're trying to swim and your character's a strong swimmer, so you might have like a skill sheet that tells you, +5 to swimming. So I'm going to roll this D20 and I add 5 to whatever I get, and then I take that number and the game master will compare it to a difficulty number. He's like, this is a really choppy river. It's really hard to swim across, so it's going to be a DC 15. Okay, well, I got a 19. Okay, you succeed. Or, okay, I got an 11. All right, you failed. You start swimming across and you're having a hard time and you're starting to sink under. And so there are a lot of rules. There's a lot of die rolling. There's a lot of math in D&D and Pathfinder. And Powered by the Apocalypse games are more narrative driven. So the rules, there are very few. And what you need to play the game is really 2d6, and the Game Master doesn't actually even roll anything. All of his moves are in reaction to what the players have done. And so if you are trying to attack a monster, you roll 2d6, you add... if you have a bonus to your kick some ass, you add that. And then it is just always set that, if you get a 10 or over, it is complete success. A 7 to 9 is a mixed success, and a 6 and under is a fail. And so instead of it saying, okay, they fail, here's what happens. Like with swim, if they fail, they start to sink. Well, okay, so kick some ass, they fail. It just says things go to hell. So that allows me to go, okay, so what's the story right now? What's the most interesting or creative thing that could happen when things go to hell here? It may not be that they take a bunch of damage. It may be that they're trying to rescue somebody, they try to kick some ass and it doesn't work. And so what would be the most interesting story-wise, narratively, is, things go to hell, so it picks up the person they're trying to protect and runs away. Or it smashes through a wall and exposes a bunch of other people who were hiding.
So there's flexibility within that narrative, no matter whether they fail or it's a medium or it's a success.
If it's a success, they do exactly what they set out to do. So that's kind of their part of it. So I'm like, okay, so now you tell me, how does this go? You wanted to run over and save this person. You got a full success. So describe it to me. And so it makes for a much more collaborative storytelling experience. Both games, no matter what, are telling a story. Ultimately, the game master, the players are trying to tell a story, but this one is a lot looser. It is for people that maybe have some more comfort with making things up on the fly. D&D and Pathfinder, they have adventure paths that you can play through. And so it's like, this happens, and this happens, and this happens. It's what people call kind of on the rails, which means that there's not a whole lot of veering away from the main story. But for this, okay, here's what I think is going to happen. They went a completely different direction.
Right.
And they succeeded on something I thought would be very difficult, or they found something I thought they'd never find, or they failed on something I thought would be really easy.
Or they completely missed something that was laid.
Correct.
So now they have to navigate around that.
Yeah. And so
you do.
It makes the story completely different in a way that if I were to try to force the story to be what I thought it was originally, it would be disingenuous and it just wouldn't make sense. Because you'd be like, well, where did that come from? Why did that happen? It doesn't make any sense. Everything in this story, as you go back through story arcs, connects. This villain is here because of something they did here. This bad guy knows this piece of information about them because they failed this one role. And, the result is that they expose information about themselves. And so it is an ever-growing story based off of the die results.
So some of the things that I've noticed as I've been listening to all the different elements of the story is that there's a repetition in things like the questions that they ask. So those are all predetermined.
Correct. So to play this game, they have, I think, 3 sheets of paper. 2 of them are their character sheets, and 1 of them is their move sheet. And so for Investigate a Mystery, it's got 6 or 7 set questions. For Kick Some Ass, it's got 6 or 7 set effects. That stuff doesn't change. And those are kind of the set few rules that kind of help guide the world.
So when they level up and they get to pick new attributes to their characters, how much of that is predetermined for them? Is that all chosen from a list?
So at the bottom of the sheet, they have a bar that says, okay, when you level up, you can take, and it just gives you a list of options. And as you take one, you cross it off so you don't have the option for it again. So it might be, take another move from your playbook. Like all the playbooks have moves that they aren't using because they haven't selected them. But one class might have that option 3 times, whereas another class might have that option 5 times. I think the Mundane has the option to take a point of luck back like 3 times, but every other class only has it once. And so they are different even between one another, but it is a predetermined set. And then there's also an advanced set that once they level up 5 times, they can take more advanced things.
So the luck was something I was specifically curious about. So when they roll just a horrendous fail, I hear them say, I'm going to spend a point of luck. Mm. So they have different amounts of luck based on who they are or what kind of character they are, or?
The amount of luck that they start with is the same. Everybody's got 7 points of luck, and then they spend it. And as you spend that, your character becomes less lucky, and once they get to no luck, they're doomed. Essentially, the world is against them. Things are supposed to get harder on them. The more luck they spend, the less luck they have. And so then as a level up option, they can buy back a point of luck. So they might be at 4, and they can get back up to 5 when they level up.
Okay, they can buy it back, and then does that 7 points, does that reset with every story arc, or?
No, that is for the life of the character.
Wow.
Yeah.
So even as we move into season 2 of the Crit Show, they'll remain with their 4 points or whatever of luck.
Probably not, because at least the way it stands in my head right now, and again, this is all subject to change based off how the story goes, but I think that season 2 will be a different game.
Oh, okay.
So it'll still be a Powered by the Apocalypse game, but I don't think it'll be Monster of the Week.
Okay, because that could be, our heroes often roll terribly.
Yes.
So that could really be damaging.
Yeah, and so it's a big deal to spend a point of luck, because you only have so many, and the world gets rougher the fewer you have. And so early on, they weren't sure when to use them, and they didn't very often. And now I think they can kind of get a sense of like, man, this is real important. I should use one.
And I know the rolling of the die is so random anyway. Although I will say, in the Monument Circle story arc, they rolled some badass stuff over. I was really impressed. That's the best they've rolled, I think.
Well, it's interesting, too, because when you think about it, a 6 and under is a fail on 2 6-sided dice.
Yeah.
They can get a 2 to a 12 on those dice. So, they really only have a small percentage of complete success. Now, once you start factoring that they have bonuses or minuses to what they're doing, it's different. But
when essentially half of their options are fails, that changes the strategy of it.
It does.
Okay, so should we jump into Halifax storyline? So right off the bat, my nerd brain noticed 2 things. When Margaret is setting up the location and kind of setting out the exposition for how the story is going to go, I noticed that it's on Drury Lane next to the muffin shop.
Yeah.
So please tell me that was just off the cuff and not a specific reference that's necessary for people to understand the connection to that nursery rhyme.
It is just completely off the cuff. They asked me the roads. One of their favorite things is to ask for unnecessary details. And so I will just pluck in that. For some reason, that scene from Shrek was in my head. Yeah. And so I just threw those both out there. Yeah, so that is completely arbitrary. There is not a secret gingerbread man running around committing murders by the Halifax.
Yet, or was like on another hallway they didn't turn down.
I guess I shouldn't say that. He could be out there.
It will. So I appreciated all of the theater references to this. That was awesome. So I don't know if you remember from your undergrad theater history class, the significance of the Drury Lane Theatre. The Drury Lane Theatre is part of Covent Garden in London's West End. It was one of the main theatres that was licensed in the 1660s during the English Restoration. So, the Puritans shut down all the theatres, and then in the English Restoration, they're reopened again, but with really specific rules. So there are a handful of theaters that are granted patents to produce what is, and I'm using quote fingers here, legitimate theater. And so this patent that was connected to the Drury Lane Theatre was originally granted to Thomas Killigrew, and he ran the King's Company. And that theater burned down several times in its history. And so I appreciated that nod with the Halifax Theater burning down at the end of this episode. And I don't know if you realize the kind of little nuggets of theater that you're laying, or theater history that you're laying in the path here.
I never expected for the Halifax Theater to burn down.
Oh, wow. So that's just something that happened because of decisions they made.
Yeah, that is a happy accident. TJ was trying to recharge his power armor, and he hooked it up to the light grid, and he failed his weird science roll.
Right.
And things go to hell. And I thought, well, he's plugged into the electrics. This is an old theater. This is what makes sense. Because in that story, they lost so much. They never really got to find clues that were hidden there. Because pretty early on, they set off the alarm on accident and then burned the theater down. So yeah, that reference is a happy accident.
Wow.
Based off of TJ's die roll.
See, that in a way that disappoints me because I was so impressed.
Yeah, well, again, that's kind of that idea that if I wanted the theater to burn down, if I had decided it was going to burn down, it would be against the spirit of the game.
Absolutely.
That can only happen as a result of them really failing something.
So another early reference that comes about that I noticed is Jake's hammer, the very kind of Mjolnir reference to Thor's hammer. He mentions Odin several times, and Thor's hammer, is that kind of a switch on the mythology, or? He
mentions Odin because in the comics, the idea is Thor uses it, but it's granted by Odin.
Oh, okay.
The Odin, it used to be his. He passed it on to his son. So yeah, I mean, it is Thor's hammer, but I think he was thinking of himself as Thor.
Got it.
And then, because he's got a god that he reports to, so it would be Odin.
I don't remember if Jake mentions this. Is his hammer, like Thor's hammer, have the unnaturally short handle, so it can only be wielded with one hand?
Tell me about that. Tell me about.
There's a reason he doesn't. So there's a collection of weapons in Norse mythology that are called thunder weapons that are connected to lightning, like Thor's hammer. So it's not just the hammer, but Thor's hammer has an unnaturally short handle because there was an error in its manufacturing. So what happens essentially is that Loki, so there are two dwarves that make the hammer, and Loki makes a bet to them. He actually bets his head to these two dwarves that they cannot make a weapon as beautifully as the competing dwarf weapon makers. I don't know the Norse terminology for a dwarf weapon maker, but Loki bets them that they cannot make a hammer as beautiful as these other two brothers. And then as they're making the hammer and one of them is bellowing the flames, Loki turns himself into a fly and starts distracting the dwarf who's bellowing. And he distracts him long enough from the bellows to wipe the fly away that he can't complete the length of the hammer handle, which leaves Thor's hammer handle unnaturally short. Meaning that it can't be wielded with two hands. So in Jake's using of this hammer, I was curious if he ever specifically clarified that it can only be used with one hand, because that was all set up by Loki being a trickster, and they come to get his head because they claim the hammer's beautiful, and he says, well, you can have my head, but you can't cut my neck. That wasn't part of the deal, so they can't take his head. Classic Loki move.
Classic Loki, pulling from the judge in Merchant of Venice.
Yeah, very much so, yes. Okay, so I admit I find no research on soul bats. Tell me about soul bats.
That's because I made it up.
Well, that would be why I couldn't find anything about soul bats. So find a light on the wood sprite tucked into the soul bat.
Yes.
But not on the soul bat.
So the soul bat was just, I wanted something that, and actually I realized this after the fact when someone else mentioned it to me, but it's actually very similar to kind of the generic bad guys in a video game called Kingdom Hearts, called The Darkness. But I wanted something that was dark and shadowy that could take over somebody. And so I just started going through the list of like, okay, so what's a power that I want this creature to have?
So you wanted a creature that was symbiotic. So something that lived off of something else.
Right? And I wanted it to be involved with a curse. There are guides in the book for how to make your own monster. And so I just kind of followed that. And I was like, okay, so I want something that's symbiotic and I want it to feed off of something. Well, what could I feed off of in a theater? Oh, okay, so a curse. I want it to, that energy. People get real upset about the Macbeth curse. They get real testy about it. And I was like, that's something I think that something could, kind of from Ghostbusters 2 even, that, it can feed off of this negative energy. And I think even the name, they kind of caught me off guard because they rolled, we were still getting used to this game, and I forgot just how powerful the moves are. The moves, if they ask the right question early on, it can really solve a lot of problems. And I think the first question they asked was, well, what is it? And I went, I have to have a name for this thing. I hadn't even thought about it. I couldn't tell you why I said that, but I was like, it's a soul bat. It is a creature that kind of hangs upside down on your soul and just feeds off of the things there.
So symbiotic relationships can be negative or positive, right? We can have a bees and pollinating flowers kind of relationship, or we can have a parasitic relationship.
Yeah, so this is definitely a parasitic. It also obviously has overtones of like Venom from Spider-Man.
Yeah, and you mention him when they're first trying to kind of navigate this situation. You mention Venom, which is, again, I don't understand superhero universes. So Venom is a villain.
The symbiote Venom is kind of evil. It's not evil, but it wants to feed off of things. It's hungry, and it has a very strict sense of like right and wrong. It's like, you commit evil, then you die. And so Spider-Man struggled with it, and it went to someone else, and the other guy kind of used it for evil, but then it went to someone who kind of could control it and use it for good, but it still wanted to do bad things. He was just able to kind of wrangle it.
Well, I think the fact that the soul bat absorbs the negativity that comes from superstitions just connects it beautifully to Macbeth. I'm going to nerd out hardcore for a minute.
I'm ready.
About the Scottish play, if you will. Now, I am not one who generally subscribes to the superstition of saying Macbeth or not saying Macbeth in a theater. Do you?
No. Ever since I met Christopher Burchild, who
directed our production. Yeah,
and he's also I'm the associate artistic director at Crossroads Repertory Theater, and he's the artistic director now. And my first year as the associate artistic director was when we did Macbeth, and he just didn't subscribe to it at all. And so I had never really cared much either way, but I was like, okay, if he doesn't care, I don't care. But we did have a director there who cared A lot.
Oh, people are impassioned
Yeah.
about this superstition.
So-
it is ingrained in them.
Yeah,
Yes.
so say what the superstition is, and then I will tell you my little side story.
Sure. So I'm gonna try to use your terminology to stay on the rails here.
Okay.
With see how
Yeah, that's good.
I'm learning so fast. So obviously there's this curse of what's traditionally in theater called the Scottish play, because that is the term you use in lieu of saying the name of the title, which is supposedly supposed to bring you bad luck. To clarify, it is the title of the play that brings bad luck, not saying the name of the character. So you can stand on stage and say, I'm playing Macbeth, but you cannot say in Macbeth.
Oh, interesting. I didn't
Yes.
know that.
So tradition holds that Macbeth has been cursed since its first performance, and even in some of its production, its early kind of inception. There are these intense supernatural elements with the witches, the three witches controlling the weather. There's Hecate or Hecate, depending on who you ask, who does this summoning of the apparitions and the magical spells. A lot of this is connected prior to the play that was written, that Shakespeare wrote the play in order to gain favor with England's then king, James I, who was not only descended from the same Stuart line as Banquo, which is the heroes in Shakespeare's play, but who was also a firm believer in witches and the dangers of the occult and the presence of the devil. James I published his own study of witchcraft and demonology in 1597, so a few years before Macbeth was written. So we have that influence, and is no doubt connected to the kind of eeriness of the work itself. So rumor has it that some local practitioners of black magic were not happy with how they were portrayed on stage, and were, at the height of witch scares in the 1600s, early 1600s, and they were not pleased with the public revelation of some of their rituals and incantations. So some people think that Shakespeare includes verbatim in Act 4 when they actually do Hecate's summoning. Those are actual lines from an incantation that were used in ceremonies.
So it's like the modern day version of when magicians put on a mask and show you how the tricks were done,
Yes.
and then
Oh,
other
yes.
magicians try to have them assassinated.
And so they were not pleased at all. And so legend holds that they decided to curse the play and any future production of it. So the most popular and long-held superstition is that uttering the word Macbeth outside of the play itself, where it's in the text, is bad luck and puts bad luck on the production and the actors acting it. There are ways to remedy this. You can spin around and say a few lines from Hamlet and to cancel out the bad juju. There's also something that's been written. So thrice around the circle bound, evil sink into the ground is what you're supposed to say to cancel out the negativity.
Do you know why Hamlet?
I don't know why specifically Hamlet.
Did
But
the witches
Hamlet,
just,
it brings,
they're like, you know what? We like this
we
Hamlet guy.
just hate Hamlet. The witches hate Hamlet. So it would be that the witches are offended by Hamlet, right?
Oh,
so
and it scares them away.
You have to scare them away.
Oh,
yeah.
I see.
Because if you did more of what they liked, they'd stick around.
Oh, I thought it was like an appeasement.
Oh. What's your favorite?
Here's this play that you like better. It's like, well, I'm really much of a...
Give me a little bit from Midsummer, baby.
I'm really more of a much ado about nothing witch, but...
I like Prospero. Bring on some Prospero. That's the kind of magic I can get behind. So the plague of this curses actors, directors, designers, audience members. There are all these different elements. And, once you have a superstition, then that superstition starts to pop up everywhere. It's like UFOs, right?
Yeah.
So there are lots of different elements. So in the original production, it's rumored that Shakespeare had to fill the role of Lady Macbeth at the last minute when the boy playing the queen suddenly became ill and died. I don't have a lot of scholarship to confirm that. It is one rumor. There have been reports of prop weapons being replaced by real ones that result in death or injury. One actor actually died in a 1672 production in Amsterdam because a fake weapon was switched with a real weapon.
Oh, I don't even think I realized that in that time period they had fake weapons. It was just like, here's a real weapon, be careful.
Well, they would have been wooden.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. The next one I found in 1934, an actor playing Macbeth suddenly went mute during a soliloquy for no explainable or inexplicable reasons.
I think it's called forgetting your line.
Yes. Yeah. Nerves.
I've just been struck mute. I forgot this monologue was in the show, and so I didn't memorize
Gonna
it.
skip to the end.
Yeah.
A falling prop nearly killed Laurence Olivier when he was playing Macbeth in 1937. Same production in the 1937 production. Director and the actress playing Lady Macduff were in a serious car accident on their way to the theater. And the prop assistant died of a heart attack backstage during a dress rehearsal. That's all of that attached to that 1937 Laurence Olivier production. So there's a host of bad luck. It might have just been their production was cursed.
Now, I have to say, though, and this was actually Chris's thing, was that if a play is old enough, if you do enough research, you could make a case that...
Absolutely.
I think that just sitting here having this conversation, talking about the things wrong with Macbeth, like the curses, there's probably 5 times as many things that happened in Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. With all of the people that were injured and broken legs and...
Yeah, I don't know that you could compare the two in terms of quality of text, though.
That's trure.
I mean, Macbeth might have a leg up.
But I mean in sense of quality of curse.
Oh, yeah. People were falling from the ceiling.
Yes, yeah. Or like mid-show, like doing a swing and breaking a leg.
I wonder, too, if these are better documented as we get into the 20th century because of the actors playing the lead role. Like one of them, a 1953 production starring Charlton Heston. We know that he was very seriously burned on his lower body when his costume caught fire because it was, according to the accident report, quote, accidentally soaked in kerosene. Maybe it was like an angry actor who was like, I'm cast as Lennox. I want to play Macbeth. Yeah. In a St. Paul production, the actor playing Macbeth dropped dead during the third act of the production. And when Alec Baldwin played the lead role in 1998 off Broadway, he nearly amputated the hand of the actor that he was sword fighting with.
Wow.
Yeah. So there are kind of 2 different camps when it comes to the curse. Is the production cursed or is the text cursed? So when the imagery of the text itself in the locker that the guys find in the Halifax with the black substance kind of pouring out of it's like, oh, well, that's got to be the source of the evil. That kind of coincides more with the text itself being cursed, which is the kind of different ideas about where the curse comes from. So there's some speculation that Shakespeare didn't write. There's this brief scene in the middle of Act 3 when the 3 witches evoke the spirit of Hecate, who's a Greek goddess of the underworld, and that this author, whoever this mysterious author was, may have been of supernatural origin, like maybe Shakespeare didn't actually write that piece himself. In Act 3, Scene 1, there's an inconsistency, which I know we noticed when we did the production, and Chris had a way of addressing it, but in Act 3, Scene 1, Macbeth addresses 2 murderers. But then when these characters reappear to attack Banquo and Fleance in 3-3, there's a 3rd murderer that has joined them with no explanation of where this murderer popped up.
Yeah.
So in our production, Chris made Macbeth that 3rd murderer.
Yeah, so that he would essentially actually have a hand in committing the murder.
Right. Some people believe that the Macbeth curse was that 3rd role was left open for Satan. And so that Satan, the idea that the actual devil appears on stage and takes the part of that 3rd murderer is a role that's reserved for Satan.
So that was his bargain. He's like, okay, I will write Act 3, Scene 1 for you, but you got to write me a role in 3-3.
Yeah.
And he's like, do you have to have lines? He's like, no, I guess not.
I'll just show up. They can just talk about me.
You could help commit a murder. Oh, yeah, I'm totally down for that. Yeah.
Kid murder? Yeah, all right. Oh, wait, the kid escapes? Damn it. And there are some theaters that are just reluctant to even put the production on period because they think it will bring about some kind of financial ruin for them. So much history attached to this play. I will stop talking about it now.
Has anybody ever done a production where they did not cast the 3rd murderer, but then the 3rd murderer appeared on stage?
I'm sure I would have found that if I had looked. Yeah. I like the idea of keeping it open for the devil, though.
Yeah, just in case.
Little devil on your shoulder, murderer behind your back, doesn't matter.
Okay, so you want to know my secret?
Yes.
So since 2008, which is, 10 years ago, I've done a lot of shows since then. When I lived in Cincinnati, I was doing 7-8 shows a year. Ever since I realized that I don't believe it to be true, but just kind of for a litmus test for myself, since that production of Macbeth, every show I've ever been in, right before I walk on stage, I say Macbeth out loud to myself. So I've done it literally thousands of times.
Wow.
Yeah. Just to see, ever since Chris was like, oh yeah, if you look long enough, you can see that a production is cursed. And I mean, maybe that explains my career. But yeah, just for myself, I I out loud say Macbeth.
It's like call the bluff of the superstition.
Within like 2 minutes of going out on stage. Now, the problem is that maybe I've been saying the name of the character and not the play.
Maybe.
And so I've just been like Neo Matrix missing that bullet on a technicality.
Maybe.
We'll never know.
So there are a few things that are unique to the Halifax story, and then there are some tropes that are going to reappear over and over. One of those is the werewolf serum. So in episode 4, I think, they go back to IPT and they learn about werewolf serum. That is this uber fast, but also addictive way for them to heal themselves.
Yeah.
So obviously there's so much history and mythology of lycanthropy.
Yeah, I really think it depends on who you ask.
Yeah. So just the general background of this, and I won't go into all of it, but it's one of the most widespread European mythologies, but it also exists as early as there's some of it that comes out of Greek research that we have during the reign of Nero. We have some speculate that there are even biblical references to this, specifically in Daniel chapter 4. There's this mention of King Nebuchadnezzar who's being cursed with the belief that he was able to change into a wild animal. No specific werewolf biblical in the text, but there's that kind of homage to it. So in the Middle Ages, the belief in werewolves grew in correlation with the belief in witches. Fear of the supernatural in general. And so these fears and paranoia travel over to the early period in the Americas. And then after the witch trials, werewolves actually become a more central focus in folklore. And we see them in Gothic literature. We see them in romantic storytelling, and obviously are solidified in pop culture. So I'm curious, this idea of the werewolf serum that heals the guys, is that just because IPT is going to, of course, research werewolves as one of the litany of creatures that they research, or is there some specific tie to werewolves?
IPT, was kind of established that they are the monster hunting organization for essentially Indiana. And it made sense to me that, this is something that's pretty common. They would have dealt with this. And one of the effects that he had picked for IPT was like weird gadgets or something. So I thought, well, this makes sense. Like if they're taking monsters' powers and technology and trying to combine them, what are some things that they could make? And so that was just the first thing that came to my mind that made sense, was like, oh, well, yeah, if you've got a creature that is super fast healing, you could probably find a way to take that and make it beneficial for the people working for you. Also, early on, we didn't understand exactly how the healing worked. It was kind of tricky to navigate. We understand it better now, but it was also a way for me, just as the game master, to give them a way to get kind of back up to snuff without having to rest for 2 or 3 days. And so that's why I added the addictive quality, because I didn't want them just doing it all the time.
Right.
And there's a story arc later, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but there's a point where it had been used enough that someone was about to turn into a werewolf. They would have actually changed their playbook from whatever it was they were to the monstrous, and they would have been part werewolf.
I also appreciate you're using a sustainable resource. I mean, in this world with monsters, you're always going to have some serum there.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was not specific to IPT. It just kind of made sense that, okay, here are 10 monsters that in my world I think are pretty run of the mill. So they would have had these, they could have studied these, and here's some equipment they could have made to help their hunters out that use the tools of the supernatural stuff that they're fighting.
Mm-hmm. And then the vampire glamour, I'm assuming, then is also another kind of repeat that they can go back to if they need that again.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really important for transforming TJ's character.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's not something that they've really ever needed to use again. They've kind of given up the idea of trying to have a normal life in addition to this work life, which makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, those are really kind of the established things so far that I've shown. They haven't really gone back for other gear from IPT that comes from monsters, and part of that was that I told them early on, you'll have to find the monsters.
Right.
Later on in the story, they get a web sack from a spider monster, and so TJ has that. He's never taken it to IPT yet to get something done with it, but he could, because here's a thing that a creature had. And so I didn't want to create too many items, because I wanted them to have to go out and find stuff if they wanted specialty things made. So
another element in the narrative that I think opens you up to so many different possibilities of where the story can go are these ley lines.
Mm-hmm.
And so Rev, explains how the ley lines work for the story, in that they're these energies from other worlds and dimensions that kind of collect and then connect and cross. And where they cross, there are these enhanced area
kind
of magic.
Leaks of energy,
Yeah, where things come through. And Rev kind of explains them as more of a natural resource. So I'm wondering if you looked at the idea of where ley lines came from and how they're connected.
Yeah, so, different book series use ley lines different ways. Obviously the ley lines are an actual kind of grid that people believe, whether supernatural or black magic or whatever. And so for our purpose, I started to make them more of a natural resource that, okay, so you've got this grid around the world where these energies kind of travel. And so what if there was a crack there? What if there was a vein that came off of it and surfaced? I really was thinking about volcanoes. When a volcano gets really powerful and it's starting to force its way up, sometimes little areas can crack off of it. So you might get a spurt of lava off on its west end, before it erupts because it just has happened to break through there. And so I wanted to have something that if they needed to try to use magic, they had a way to access it, because none of my players actually have the ability to use magic. It's a game mechanic called Additional Weird, and it's a supplement that they put out after the game was originally out. But originally, everybody in the game had the ability to use magic. And use magic is a great power. It's super powerful, but it doesn't make sense for everybody.
So you don't think Jake's transportation or teleporting is magic?
Well, no. Use magic is an actual move.
Oh.
So it's like investigate a mystery, kick some ass.
Got it. Okay.
One of the moves is use magic. And so it has specific effects. See another time and place, heal a point of damage, bar a creature from a room, banish something from this plane. There's a couple other ones, but it just didn't make sense for them to have those. Like, why would Tass know how to use magic?
Right.
And so he took Trust Your Gut, which makes way more sense. TJ took Weird Science. Jake took No Limits so that he could be super strong or super fast. And so I've played a number of games now, and I always implement that more weird options. And very few people ever keep use magic because it just doesn't make sense for their character. And so I wanted them to have a way to access magic because magic's a really important part of the game, but I didn't want to necessarily penalize them for leaning into their character build.
Mm-hmm. I think the volcano analogy is a good one. That they create a path, and somewhere along the path, something pops up within that path that becomes a touch point. So just a little bit of background. So the term ley lines was first coined in 1921 by this amateur archaeologist, Alfred Watkins, in England, where he, standing on the hillside, noticed the kind of symmetry, I guess, or the linear patterns of a combination of things. So natural landmarks, which goes with the natural resources as Rev describes them in the story, but also then religious sites of significance and then man-made structures. So there's a combination and what pops up along the line. And it's kind of this pseudo-scientific significance, I guess. There's lots of debate on this. But that essentially when England was more densely forested, that these landscape points kind of popped up, and then people use them for navigation or ceremonial significance. Especially in early England, where you have a combination of Christian significance and pagan significance. So those were used to kind of help navigate those points. But Watkins never assigned any supernatural meaning to these lines at all. They were more so used for navigation, as I said. So the New Age idea of them, that they have a spiritual or physic or mystic power, is definitely more tied to a more contemporary interpretation of them.
I think the first time that I really had much exposure to that idea is a book series called The Dresden Files, where they use ley lines, and a place where some ley lines meet. There's an island that's super powerful when it comes to magic out on Lake Michigan. And this game is built on the idea of tropes. It is Monster of the Week because it is supposed to feel like an episodic TV show. It is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's
Charmed,
supernatural.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
And so, this is definitely a game where, I like this idea. I'm going to take it and kind of twist it because people will be familiar with it, and it'll be a little bit different. But it'll still lean into that idea of tropes and ideas that people are kind of familiar with.
One of the things that got a little complicated for me in listening to it, and I'm sure it's just because my brain isn't trained in thinking of RPG worlds, was the layout of the candles and how those kind of mirrored in levels of the building. I had a hard time thinking of how that would be sketched out. Can you talk a little bit more about the significance of that?
So yeah, the importance of that is the idea that, on a spell, on a summoning circle, and whatever, that there are points of power to it, and that each one is representative of an element. So I have, and I don't think that they've discovered all of it yet, but each of those candles is representative of something. And so one of them, the candle, is connected to the power source. It's connected to the ley line. So it is the candle that part of the circle is what drains the ley line. And, this candle is connected to the creature that you're trying to drain from. And this candle is connected to the ability to transfer everything that happens in the circle to another candle of that same makeup in a different circle. So each of the candles has a specific purpose in what it does in this ceremony. And so I'm not sure if I should go through them because I can't remember if they've discovered them all. I don't want to spoil anything.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want too many spoilers.
But yeah, so they are significant, and something that was brought up, they were kind of looking at them like, oh, they just look like candles, and they never really took the time to investigate them. But just because the candles all look the same, or they might just be a different color, doesn't necessarily mean that they're made of the same material or that they have the same components mixed into them.
I see, yeah.
So like these candles were specially made.
So it's not
there
just
might be additional ingredients inside of it that help make it magic or help connect it. The thing that they do know is that, this circle, that there's 3 of them, and that the pattern of the candles matched at each one. And so it is a very specific layout. And if they can figure out that, each of these circles does the same thing, well, why? Okay, so we figured out that these 2 connect to this connects to this. So what does this connect to? Oh, we figured out what this connects to, and it gives us the next piece of the story because say that, this candle transfers this to the center point. And so all 3 of these circles are transferring something to a middle point.
So it's not just their proximity, but it's also what they're composed of.
And it's their order in the circle.
Now, when I was listening to this, I was picturing it like a Venn diagram, but now I don't think that it is a Venn diagram.
That's correct. It is not.
Yeah.
It is, think of it more like a triangle, and there's a circle at each point, and then there's something in the middle as well.
Mm-hmm. And they pop up again.
Yes.
In Hawaii.
Yep.
Right. So this is going to be an ongoing theme that we see then.
Correct. They essentially are seeing in Hawaii a microcosm of the macrocosm.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately in Hawaii, that room got kind of destroyed in the investigation. Early at the beginning of this episode, you talked about the idea of like, there's things that they may just have missed completely because things were destroyed or a roll went badly. And that's a perfect example that room could have told them exactly what was happening in Indianapolis, but half of it got destroyed due to bad investigation.
Under the bus. You just threw the guys under the bus.
The dice threw them under the bus. And because I think they're aware of that. They're like, we could have figured this out, but, because look, this is kind of the same. But really, what was happening in Hawaii could show them what was happening in Indianapolis if they had been able to collect all that data.
Another interesting overlap, or I guess reappearance, would be the wood sprite that was trapped by the soul bat, that then reappeared 5 story arcs later.
Yeah.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
So again, Rev gives them this introduction of a wood sprite being a collection of positive energy that's connected to nature. I think he says it's condensed into physical form or something like that.
He says a lot of things.
He talks a lot.
Not all of them are probably always true.
He's a bit of a know-it-all. Pretentious bastard. So wood sprite is a pretty generic term. So is there a specific kind that you have in mind? I'm always interested in how wood sprites and fairies and nymphs are kind of portrayed, especially in pop culture, because there's this generic term that's almost always a tutelary character that's specifically connected to nature. Far back, there's a deity called Leshy. This is a character that's in Slavic and Russian mythology, and there are all kinds of iterations of this deity, and I will not try and butcher the other Slavic pronunciation, so I'm just going to stick with Leshy.
Okay.
But it's a deity that guards the forest, and it's interesting to me as this being one of the earliest renditions of a wood sprite because it's a very masculine being. It's interesting that in pop culture, we've really feminized the idea of wood sprites and fairies and that kind of thing. But Leshy, as a deity, oversees the forest and the woods and nature and hunting, and has this very masculine energy and is traveling with wolves and bears. And so that kind of misconfiguration to me is something that I've noticed a lot in pop culture, especially considering how this creature functions when she reappears later. She seems very feminine too, and all the wood sprites in Elrond actually appear more feminized to me. So I just didn't know if there was a connection.
In the moment, the creation of that character was, again, off of a botched roll. Somebody made a weird roll. Okay, they got to find something here. And so I kind of went through my mental Rolodex of what I know about Indianapolis when it comes to the game specifically. And so I was like, okay, well, I know that this is here. And so it had started out as that there was a group of wood sprites in this little park. But then as things kind of went on, it evolved into, oh, no, I think that this person has come from this other place. And because of the magic that's going on, it created a tear. And, that's not necessarily something that I think that they have pieced together yet, but something that happened here and there at the same time is what made it so she was able to get here. It's the same way that they're able to get back. It was not happenstance that she appears there. It is connected to the events that they're examining that night. And so for me, they are not necessarily physically male or female. I very much picture them as actually like more humanized version of Ents, that they are bark-skinned and the hair or the beard is moss or vines or whatever. But it is, it's interesting that you say that because obviously I created a matriarchy with that. It is a child queen.
Yeah.
Really kind of inspired by the little girl from Game of Thrones, Lady Mormont, the 10-year-old girl who's a real badass.
Yeah. Yes.
And so then just surrounding herself with powerful people, then decided what their culture was and what was important to them and what they did, what their function is, and then just started kind of creating the structure of the society and of the royal court based off of that.
It's interesting that you make the connection back to the Tolkien Ents, because when you look at drawings or early sketches of this deity Leshy, it's very much that huge masculine humanoid looking character that's made of tree bark kind of, but these characters in our story are a much smaller version of. They're not the size, they're not the scale of the Ents.
Correct.
But they're the same kind of configuration.
Do you know, this is kind of off topic, but is Leshy the model for Liam Neeson's character in Monster Calls, where he is the giant tree creature, the little kid who's dealing with the trauma of his mom's death?
Oh, wow. I haven't seen that film. I couldn't answer. Yeah,
he's dealing with the trauma of his mom's death, and he's so angry and mad, and he keeps summoning this creature, and it's a giant, it's an Ent, essentially, who helps smash things and break stuff and scream when he's mad, but very masculine tree character.
Yeah. So before we wrap this up, I have one more question. I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I'm really curious to the figure who was on the roof. There are all these references in pop culture and mythology of the Invisible Man and the invisibility. Does he have invisibility cloak? These kinds of things, that the power that can't be seen, and obviously Jake interacts with that.
Yeah.
At one point on the roof. So what? I feel like I'm missing something there.
You are, and that's probably something we'll have to talk about on a future episode of Investigate the History. That figure has not returned yet, but it will. It was not there arbitrarily. There was not an invisible person with a sniper rifle on the building for no reason. That piece of the story, I assume, will come up again relatively soon.
Okay, and there are several things that are going to come up again. So as we wrap this up, this idea of werewolves and vampires and the candles and the pattern and the ley lines, that's all going to pop up again in our next story arc. Yep. So when we meet again next month.
We could say 3, Harvey is here.
It's true. Or maybe we're leaving a spot open for the devil.
Oh, yep.
As we should.
He might be a Patreon subscriber, so.
It's just
We'll always leave the third mic open for the devil.
That's creepy, but good. I like that, and I can get behind it. So in our next episode, then we will be jumping into more of these overlaps and adding some Polynesian mythology as we make our way to Hawaii. See where the story takes us after that.
All right.
All right. Thanks so much to all of you for listening to the very first episode of Investigate the History. And I'm looking forward to moving on with all of you to our next adventure in Hawaii. Investigate the History, hosted by Carolyn Conover, is a Crit Show Studios production, edited and produced by Brandon Wentz with music by Jake Purley.